right, IndustryCast. I don't know how many we've done at this point in time, but we sure are enjoying an opportunity to pour into our customers. That is what our mission is. Our mission is to always be adding value at CapEx, and then, of course, building relationships that work. We don't want to just be a sales company that shows up when there's something to buy, but someone that is continually offering support and feedback for our customers. That is our mission. So today, in this series that we've got here with IndustryCast, our mission is to kind of talk about some of the expertise that we have, and then pour into, again, our customers with regards to that knowledge, share with them in an effort to help them grow and get better as well. So we welcome any questions that you have along the way. Feel free to type those in the chat room so that we can address them while we're on the call, or we've had some questions come up via email. We just got one yesterday on last week's presentation, and then we also get questions via YouTube. When we post these on YouTube, some of the customers ask questions also. So again, our mission is just to add value, always be adding value. So before we get started, a little bit of a commercial. We want to talk about the companies that we represent and have represented for well over a decade, almost going on 2 decades now. ATC Automation, they're in Cookeville, Tennessee. They are a large automation assembly equipment integrator, and what we always say about them is 85% of our business is with repeat customers. That means that year over year, customers are coming back. So 15% of our business is with new customers, but 85% is with customers that we have done business with in the past, and that says a lot for an automation company. Very, very proud of that statistic. Cincinnati Test Systems is the largest leak test company in the world. Pressure decay, mass flow, helium mass spec, functional testing. If you need to test a part on the end of the line as you're assembling it, that's what Cincinnati Test Systems provides. Custom system as well as standard instrumentation. Duquesne Plastic Joining, they are a large and global plastic joining company. Vibration welding, hot plate welding, ultrasonic welding, all things welding of plastics, joining of plastics, that's what they do. They, again, have a global presence, and they do custom solution as well as standard products. Symetric is one of the Cincinnati Test Systems companies. They do high-speed in-process data management, so all things AI, Industry 4.0, that's what they help companies move toward. They advance their digital footprint in these companies. So, and then Keller Technologies is all things air filtration, industrial air filtration, wet filtration, as well as dry filtration. So they cover all aspects of air filtration. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. Again, today what we're going to be talking about is defining capital projects. I want to lay the groundwork so as we move forward, we all are on the same page as it relates to what we are talking about as it relates to capital projects. So just a few questions to answer in the beginning. The first question, what is capital? We hear that term thrown around. What does it mean? What is capital? Well, capital is essentially a pile of money, and a pile of money that you're going to invest in order to have a return. So you invest your capital in an effort to get a return on that capital. So if you had, let's say you had $100,000, you want to put your capital, that's what you have $100,000 in capital, you want to put that money to work so that it generates more monies back to you, right? So you want that money to work for you and come back. Well, companies operate in the same way, right? They've got a finite amount of capital, and their mission is to invest that capital into new businesses, so that there are, or not into new businesses necessarily. I mean, a lot of times that's what they do, but what they want to do is invest that capital so that they can get a return on investment, right? So return on investment or return on capital, there are a couple of different ways that we term that companies use to term. So it's return on capital or return on investment. But anyway, that's what capital is, probably more of a definition than we really need. So what is a capital investment? Well, that's what we just talked about, taking that money that you have, that pool or pile of money, and investing it in something that's going to return revenue. So you want to increase revenue or increase cash flow, right? So increasing cash flow means that you have made a process more efficient or made your operations more efficient. So if you are more efficient, you're going to be more profitable, right? That's the idea behind the cash flow aspect of an investment. And then from a revenue perspective, let's say you get a new project, you have been awarded a new project from Ford, and you want to invest that capital in a way that is going to increase revenue. It's not necessarily going to increase your cash flow, probably in the beginning, but it is going to increase the revenue for your organization. And then, of course, the more efficient, more effective you get at producing the products on that piece of capital that you purchased, you're going to be more profitable and therefore increase cash flow over the long term. So how does a typical manufacturing company increase cash flow or revenue without acquiring another business? They invest their capital into new equipment is a most common strategy for a company to increase its cash flow and revenue. So that investment in new equipment is called a capital investment. So a capital investment is a capital asset, and a capital asset is depreciated differently than a fixed asset. So a fixed asset is your building that you are in, some of those fixtures that are in your facility, those have a different depreciation schedule than a capital project does, because capital equipment tends to wear out way more quickly than an actual facility is, assuming that it is properly kept up. All right. So investment options. So your company, the management of your organization, they've got options, right? So they got options to maybe invest in another organization and invest in another company that's going to increase the revenue for the business. They've got, let's say they have $1 million. They have to invest that $1 million in a way that is going to maximize the return back to the organization. Management's responsibility is one that they call a fiduciary responsibility. So management, especially of a publicly traded company, they have a fiduciary responsibility, which means that they are responsible for the monies of the business, and they are responsible for investing those monies in the most efficient way to maximize the return back to the business. That's what they have signed up to do. So when we take a project to them, they are looking at, should we invest this $1 million in this project, in this project, in this project? So to us, as manufacturing engineers, we've put together this request for a quote or request for appropriations in an effort to try to get some capital so that we can make this capital investment. But your management is going to be reviewing the options for that $1 million, and their responsibility to the organization, to their management, to the shareholders, to the stakeholders, is that they maximize the return. So they're going to select the investment that is most strategic, ideally, and is going to maximize the return back for the business. So sometimes when you think something is a no-brainer, you're like, why aren't they approving this? This doesn't make any sense to me. The reason is because they've got multiple options that they need to determine what is the best use of the company's funds. And the reason I harp on that a little bit is because when I was a manufacturing engineer just out of college, I missed that. And I would get really frustrated with management if I had something that I needed that seemed like it was a no-brainer, we've got to have this, and they weren't approving my request for funds. It really irked me. But now that I have been involved in this capital equipment world for the last 20 years, I understand more on the management side what they have to go through in order to ensure that they're getting the maximum return for their investment. So the CPM's responsibility, now that's the capital project manager. It's got a little acronym for capital project managers. What you are as a manufacturing engineer or project engineer, that responsibility that you have is to ensure that you are providing accurate information to management so that they can determine what the best use of funds for the organization. The worst thing that you can do is overstate the expected return on an investment, because management's going to get in trouble, and you know that rolls downhill. And that means that you're going to get in trouble. That's going to hurt your credibility with management when you say, hey, this is a no-brainer, knock it out, we're going to get our money back in 6 months, and then 3 years later, you still haven't captured those funds. That is egg on your face as a capital project manager with your management team. So it's really important as a capital project manager that we provide accurate information to management so that they can make the responsible decision as it relates to that pool of funds called capital that they need to invest. So capital investment justification. There are any number of capital investment justification strategies that companies use. Some companies require a 1-year return on investment. So that means that if they invest $1 million, 12 months later, their expectation is that they're going to have recuperated or recovered that $1 million. So they have that capital back in their coffers to redeploy to generate, ideally, more millions of dollars. But that's not necessarily, depending on the level of investment or the complexity of the project, is going to determine whether you can get a 1-year return on investment. But your company, so the people internally, oftentimes your chief financial officer will set those rules for an expected return, and they will not make an investment if it does not meet the company's requirements for a return on investment. So each company, like I mentioned, each company has a formula. They've got their own formula. So your role is to determine what that formula is and then plug the numbers in and make sure that it is justifiable. So capital investment, so you've got total investment plus the total expense equals the project cost. Oftentimes what I've experienced with my customers is they'll focus on the cost of the equipment and they leave out all of the ancillary expenses, the costs that are that have to be there. So as an example, you've got to purchase debug parts if you're going to run a piece of equipment off or get a piece of equipment ready for production. You've got to make sure that it is properly debugged. So the cost of those components is a cost for the project. So we've got to make sure that when we are working on our capital justification that we are including every expense that's there. If you've got to fly to the facility multiple times, you got to include that. You're going to have to include the stay while you're there. So hotel rooms, travel, rental cars are just the tip of the spear on the expenses that you should expect above and beyond just the purchase of the equipment itself. You're going to have riggers in your facility, set it in place. You're going to have to hook it up to electricity. You're going to have to potentially have additional air supply. So maybe you have to purchase another compressor. So there's a lot to take in and consider when you're going to make a capital investment. You want to make sure you do not leave those out of your calculations. So you want to take all that in as for consideration of your calculations. So let's look at an example. So this is the common investment calculation, or here are some common investment calculation methods. So return on investment. So that's percent gain from dollars invested, right? Pretty straightforward. So that is net income divided by equipment costs. Net income. So that's net income from the parts produced on the equipment or materials or whatever that equipment might be manufacturing or producing. So the higher the percentage, of course, the better. That's what we want. So John invests $100,000 2 years ago in a piece of equipment that has generated $50,000 in net income. So the return on investment is $50,000 divided by 100,000. So that's 0.5 times 100 is 50%. So you've had a 50% return on that investment in the first 2 years. So that's not bad. I would personally take that bet every day. I would take $100,000 and make an investment so that I could if I could generate $50,000 over the course of the next couple of years, then that's going to be, doubling the money in a short amount of time. Now, that may not be good or an acceptable return on investment for your organization. Again, it's just a matter of what are the options for your management team. Another method is called the payback period. So with consistent net income. The challenge with this one is we don't often have consistent net income, especially in the beginning. If we have a new piece of equipment for a new project, it's going to be ramping over time. We have a different calculator that we can use for that. So the PVP equals cost of investment divided by annual cash flows. So the shorter the PVP, the better, right? So this is essentially the time it's going to take for us to get our money back from the investment. So again, John invested $100,000 into a new piece of equipment. The equipment generates $25,000 of net income per year. So 100,000 divided by 25,000 means that it's going to be a 4-year return on investment. Many companies that I know, that would not be good enough for them to put their funds out there for this particular project. Companies are often looking for a 2 or 3 year payback. It could be reasonable or unreasonable, who knows, but that is, as a general rule, what most of the companies that I work with are looking for, the 2 to 3 year return. So in this case, 4 years might not be bad for you and I, but for corporations, it might not be an enticing enough return on investment. Here's another method. So this is with inconsistent net income, which is more likely what we're going to experience. So again, in this case, we've got $1 million that we've invested into a new piece of equipment. The program has a ramp period as explained below. So we've got this is over the course of essentially 3.5 years. So year 1, net income is 0, right? So essentially we're underwater $1 million. The next year, we generate $150,000, so our cumulative net income at the end of that year is a minus $850. And then as we continue to ramp up, by year 4, we are money ahead. So in this case, we've got a return or net income of $450,000, $225,000 of net income at the end of year 4. So we've got a 3.5 year payback period based on the inconsistent net income. So it is this is a more accurate method of calculating than most of the methods, unless you have equipment that's already functioning and you're looking to just make improvements or increase the efficiency of that equipment. So there's going to be a different calculation that you might use for that because you're already in production. So you can easily calculate, okay, if I'm making 1,000 widgets a day and I increase my efficiency so that I can make 1,100 widgets a day, that's a 10% increase in my efficiency. So you can do it's easier to calculate from that perspective. But when you have a brand new piece of equipment and you've never run it before, you know there's going to be a ramp period for your customers as they begin going to market with the new product. So especially on these new programs, we've got to have this runway to show the inconsistent net income. So hopefully that is not too awfully confusing. So other considerations as it relates to this return on investment for your organization, the time value of money. So this isn't something that you would necessarily have to calculate as a manufacturing engineer, but your CFO would be using a consideration of the time value of money in the calculation as well, so that because obviously $1 million today is different than $1 million 2 years from now, so they're going to potentially use a discounted cash flow model whenever they're doing a calculation. So debt servicing costs. If your corporation has to borrow the money to make the capital investment, then there's going to be additional cost associated with the use of those funds. That debt servicing cost needs to also be calculated in. Not something that you would necessarily have to worry about. Your CFO, again, or whoever in your finance organization is going to be looking at that and then adding those numbers in to get an appropriate snapshot or an accurate snapshot of what the actual return is going to be. And then you need to identify those operational expenses that you don't currently have, meaning that you're going to have more maintenance people, you're going to have more supervision, you're going to have more operators, just more energy usage. If we get down into the weeds, which it's possible with calculating all of these different expenses, we need to just be mindful that it's not a matter of just buying $1 million piece of equipment and putting it into a facility. There's a lot that goes on. That $1 million piece of equipment ends up really being $2 million because of all of the additional effort, the preparation in the facility, the rigging, the debug parts, the additional supervision, the additional maintenance people, the additional training, everything that goes into actually deploying a piece of capital equipment could be considered in that cost. Now, you don't want to get too crazy because obviously you'll never buy a piece of equipment if the return is not attractive for your management. So here are some common mistakes that we see. So an insufficient return on investment. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important as a manufacturing engineer when you are doing the calculations, when you're creating your request for appropriations, that you calculate this accurately. You don't want to mislead your management. If you do, it's going to come back to bite you in the end. So it's really important that you're accurate in your return on investment calculations because they have egg on their face with their stakeholders, and that again is just going to roll downhill, and you're going to have egg on your face because you didn't provide accurate or you misrepresented those numbers. So insufficient payback period. So we don't have enough, we're not allowing enough time for an appropriate payback. So it's going to take us 3.5 years, but our company requires 3 years. But when you look at this investment, it sure does make a lot of sense. Or in an insufficient payback period, when you make the investment and you say it's going to be a 3-year payback, but it's actually a 4-year, again, that reduces the company's return on investment. So we've got to make sure to take that into consideration. The next is over-exaggerating the net income. So we're saying, this is going to be, we're going to run 1 million parts the first year. Well, maybe in reality, you're going to produce 200,000 parts in the first year because that is a more common ramp method. Not everyone is going to go out and immediately buy this product. So we've got to make sure that we are properly forecasting what that net income is going to be. That's a matter of working with your marketing department and working with other people, your project, your program manager. For example, if it's a new program for Ford, work with your program manager to truly understand what are the ramp, what are we expecting as far as ramp time frame for our net income of this project. Underestimating project costs, again, very common. We just don't calculate in everything that it takes, and then underestimating the time to complete. I know I personally, every project I ever undertake as it relates to here at my house is I underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take. Oh yeah, it should only take 15 minutes to do that. Of course, 2 hours later, here I am messing around with it. So it's important that we are honest in our assessment of the amount of time that it's going to take. So that does it. I mean, this was a quick one. Again, just want to establish a foundation for what is a capital project. It's a company's use of its capital in order to increase revenue or increase cash flow. Those are the two reasons that companies invest their capital. There is one other reason that I didn't mention, and that is to solve safety problems. Oftentimes, we don't have to go through the normal cost justification. If there's a safety issue that needs to be remedied, the companies are often very willing to make that investment to ensure everyone's safety. So that is an exception to the rule, but a company, from a management perspective, they have a fiduciary responsibility for your organization and to the stakeholders of the organization to make the best use of the funds that are available to them. And that can be frustrating for us as manufacturing engineers, process engineers, when we're trying to get our capital approved. But just we have to remember what their responsibilities are. So always keep that in mind. So that's really a summary of capital projects. Next week, we're going to talk about creating an executive summary, and that is really about how we create the vision. We identify the risks for the projects. We get clear on the time frame and really dig deep into sharing the information with management in a summary form so that they can accurately know what's going on with the project, what are the expectations and whatnot. So we're going to talk about that next week. Mike, any questions?
No, sir. I posed it to everybody, and we don't have any questions for you today.
All right, very good. Well, we welcome them after the fact as well. I know many customers tell us that they are watching these not during the recording, but after they're recorded. So any questions that come up, please let us know. Like I mentioned, next we're going to be talking about the executive summary. That's on June 10th. And then we're going to talk about building the ideal capital project management team, what that entails and what to think about and consider. That's going to be on June 17th. Again, thank you. We don't thank you enough for all of your support. We appreciate our customers. We don't exist without our customers, and we are just thankful. And again, we are here to serve you in any way that we can. Mike Dorsey down there in South Carolina, you just heard from Mike. Chris Mullins in Eastern North Carolina and in Virginia, and then Hooper is up there in Western North Carolina and select accounts there in the upstate of South Carolina. So we are CapEx Sales. My name is Russ Sorrells, and just grateful that you took the time to hop on with us today. Anything we can do to help you out, please let us know. Bye-bye.